Mercedes' double podium in Spain has got their fans very excited, and for good reason. It was the first time this season they've actually looked capable of getting on the podium off pure merit. George Russell's performance was especially impressive after his terrible qualifying session. I don't want to rain on their parade too much, but there are some definite downsides to their improvements. Today we'll talk about if the team can actually improve any more, or if their upgrades for the season are basically done already. So don't go anywhere. At last week's Spanish Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton and George Russell scored a double podium after the Brackley team's comprehensive upgrade package delivered a solid step forward. Before Spain, their average gap to the race winner, whichever Red Bull that was just over 39 seconds. While Hamilton still finished 24 seconds behind dominant winner Max Verstappen, Mercedes W14 was the second strongest car on the high downforce circuit, providing the team with a solid baseline to continue its recovery. They gained 0.227 seconds a lap on Red Bull in Spain, but Lewis was still 0.365 seconds a lap slower than Max. That is still a massive gap to close, but let's briefly focus on the positives. The double podium elevated Mercedes above Aston Martin to second place in the constructors' standings. If they stay there till the end of the season, that'll mean a big chunk of extra prize money, which is obviously a good thing for the team. But Andrew Chauvelin, the team's trackside engineering director, expects the Canadian Grand Prix to be a more difficult weekend for the Silver Arrows, due to the low downforce nature of Montreal's circuit Gilles Villeneuve, which is the polar opposite of the Barcelona circuit that its revamped 2023 car was competitive at. The fact is that the update kit works very well around circuits like Barcelona with a lot of high-speed performance, Chauvelin said in Mercedes' post-race debrief on Wednesday. "We've been better at the fast circuits and the front limited tracks. We ended up with a really good balance and really good race pace. Now, where we're going to go next week, Montreal, it's a very different circuit. There are more low-speed corners, quite a lot of straight line full throttle, and we would expect more of a challenge there. Spain has been used as a test track for Formula 1 teams for many years, due to the old layout having sections that required the car to work in different ways. Different sections gave a good representation of how the car works in high downforce and low downforce corners. The Catalonian circuit was changed for this year's Grand Prix though, and the chicane before the final corner was removed, significantly reducing the downforce needed for the track. I've seen plenty of arguments from fans that performance in Spain proves that Mercedes can perform elsewhere, and that would be true if we were still in 2022, but unfortunately, the track changes have made it less representative, just as Andrew Chauvelin says. We're not thinking that we're going to be nipping at the heels of Red Bull. We are aware that Canada is likely to be a bigger challenge than the Sunday we just had in Barcelona. Mercedes' move into second place in the Constructors' Championship should be seen as a win for the team, but there are consequences to their success. As part of a package of changes to the regulations, which included the introduction of the cost cap in 2021, teams are restricted to the number of wind tunnel testing runs and computational fluid dynamics, or CFD items, they can do to develop their racing car. In years gone by, the amount of aerodynamic development was unrestricted. It meant some teams ran their wind tunnels 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Some teams even ran more than one wind tunnel. That kind of development helped teams gain crucial tenths of seconds, but was hugely expensive. Mercedes' development bill got so huge, the team was spending $500 million a year running the team. Now, there is a sliding scale of aero testing in place. The amount of testing you can do is based off a baseline. The baseline is 320 wind tunnel runs and 2,000 CFD items per 8 weeks. Mercedes' third place finish in the Constructors' Championship last season meant they only got 80% of that, so 256 wind tunnel runs and 1,600 CFD items. When the aero testing limits are recalculated at the end of June, if Mercedes are still in second in the Constructors' standings, they'll only get 75% of that baseline. Considering they have just completely overhauled their car's aero package, they need all the testing they can get. If you think that having more aero testing time isn't that big of an advantage, just look at what Aston Martin have done this season. They had 100% of the baseline testing to use last season and over the winter, and still have that amount until the end of June. They have leapt from an uncompetitive 7th to 3rd on the grid. Mercedes are just now gathering data on their new package and will undoubtedly find plenty of places they can make improvements. They'll want as much testing time as possible to make sure that the upgrades they bring make the most of those areas for development. At the moment, Mercedes sits second in the Constructors' Championship, 18 points ahead of Aston Martin and 52 points ahead of Ferrari. If Aston Martin performs well in Canada, then they could move back ahead of Mercedes, giving the Silver Arrows some extra aero testing in the second half of the season. But former F1 World Champion Damon Hill is thinking much further ahead. Hill reckons Mercedes should do really badly for the rest of the season in order to drop down the standings and secure that all-important extra aero testing time to develop next year's W15. I think going forward, you've got the development curve and the cost cap restrictions to think about, because, ironically, the better Mercedes do, the less scope they've got for the following year, he said in the latest Sky Sports podcast. So you've got Aston Martin, who are benefiting, if you like, from a poor performance relatively from last year. The glass ceiling is much higher for them. And you kind of wonder whether Mercedes ought to be thinking about doing really badly between now and the end of the year. Performing badly on purpose goes against everything Formula 1 is about, but there is a clear advantage to doing so for Mercedes. They have no chance of catching Red Bull this season, so why not make it easier for themselves next year? Despite Damon Hill thinking he has a great idea, there are plenty of reasons Mercedes shouldn't be tanking their results this season. Finishing lower means less prize money, but for a team like Mercedes, with a huge financial backing, that might not be a problem. Hill admitted there would be a financial downside, saying, "There'll be accountants and all sorts of experts that will tell me that's an absolutely stupid policy and strategy. It isn't just prize money at risk though. I would be very surprised if there weren't performance bonuses in the sponsorship contracts for the Mercedes team. Sponsors want their name on the TV for the world to see, and that happens most when the car your name is on is doing well. How often do you see a Haas or a Williams or an Alfa Romeo on the race broadcast? A little, but definitely not as much as you see a Red Bull or a Ferrari or a Mercedes at the moment, and that's because they're racing at the front of the grid. Even if Mercedes don't purposefully tank their performance, which I don't think they will, they might see themselves slip backwards for the rest of the season anyway. Andrew Chauvelin has warned there won't be any leaps and bounds in Mercedes upgrades for the rest of this season, as the team spent a significant portion of the budget cap on the new front suspension. While all eyes were on the side pods, with Mercedes having axed the zero pods in favour of a bulky downwash concept, the team has downplayed the impact those had on the double podium in Spain, insisting it's a package deal and everything has to work together. With the upgrades including a new floor as well as front suspension, Mercedes can't continue upgrading all season. Basically, we made a new suspension, and suspension is expensive to make and to fit on the car, he said. So the reality is that with the budget cap, we're always looking at our situation in this World Championship. We don't know how many things we're going to do. I don't expect to make any leaps and bounds. Chauvelin did admit that the money was well spent, but it is unlikely the Silver Arrows are going to be able to make changes that will gain them the remaining 3.5 seconds a lap they need to compete with Red Bull for race wins. Especially when Red Bull will be continuing to upgrade all season. Ferrari might find themselves in a similar position as well, having overhauled their aero package and floor in Spain. This might mean that Aston Martin are going to be Red Bull's only challengers as the season continues. Do you think Mercedes will find the money to continue upgrading their car? Or should they stop the upgrades in hope of getting more testing time next year? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and until next time, drive safe and bye for now.